thanks everybody for joining us tonight for the State of the Town of Brighton 2021. I'll first acknowledge that while we meet remotely, the town of Brighton is situated on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Onondaga tribe of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, whom we recognize and respect as the traditional custodians of this land throughout the generations. We pay our respect to the Onondaga elders, both past and present. The history, culture, and traditions of the Onondaga are worthy of our understanding and study, and we praise those who keep their traditions alive. We recognize that the study is of ongoing importance if we are to truly understand the history of our community and our nation, and we support all efforts to ensure that we and future generations continue that study and that respect in a way that is honest and truthful, so that in the words of the great chief and orator, Sakajawatha, we may always work together to brighten the chain of friendship. Tonight, as we look towards the future, and frankly, we all are yearning to see the future like never before, we must also look back at the year past, 2020. If Pearl Harbor was the date that will live in infamy, perhaps 2020 will be known as the year that will live in infamy. As Queen Elizabeth II once famously said in a very different context, it was truly annus horribilis. 2020, though, was a year that saw remarkable work and remarkable courage on the part of people working on the front lines of the pandemic, from healthcare workers to people caring for residents of group homes and senior living communities, to supermarket workers. Frankly, though, it was also a year that saw failures from the highest levels in Washington, where the administration refused to acknowledge the seriousness and significance of the pandemic, refused to model appropriate health behavior, and put our democracy at risk. It also saw failures closer to home, when Daniel Prude was forced to lie face down with his head in a sack on icy cold pavement, surrounded by people whose job it was to help the community and the people they served, including Daniel Prude. But instead, they demonstrated a profound indifference to the life of one Black man lying alone on the streets of Rochester. Since that time, we've seen 3 additional high-profile incidents, one just this morning, that call into serious question the policies and training of the Rochester Police Department, particularly as it relates to the use of force as opposed to de-escalation when dealing with mental health issues. Daniel Prude's life and his death must not have been in vain. The Brighton Police Department is an entirely separate agency from the Rochester Police Department, with its own training, hiring practice, and a very different guiding philosophy of community policing. I have the highest confidence in the leadership and the members of the Brighton Police Department. However, Mr. Prude's death and state directives require that all law enforcement agencies re-examine their operations and their philosophy of service. Tonight, the Brighton Police Department will be presenting the draft police reform plan as required by Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 203. I will talk more in a moment about the Brighton Police Department and the community policing philosophy that is at the heart of the service they provide to our community. Even as we look back at a pandemic that has changed the world as we knew it and impacted us in so many ways, Brighton was better prepared for rapid and involuntary change than most. And we will continue to be prepared for the changes needed as we emerge from the pandemic. The same attitudes and core values that I've cited in the past to explain Brighton's strength as a community are the same values and attributes that have helped carry Brighton and our neighbors through this past year. Because of that, because of the work of our public health heroes and essential workers, the work of our educators, and the work of parents and grandparents who were thrust into new roles as educators. And in spite of the crises we have faced during the past year and must continue to address, the state of the town of Brighton, and more importantly, the future of the town of Brighton, is strong. Tonight, I want to share with you how we've responded to a year of COVID and unrest, and how we continue to move forward together as a community. 1 year ago, almost to the day, the town of Brighton, the state of New York, and the nation went into COVID lockdown. I will always have the enduring memory of my semi-annual visit to Brighton High School's law and government class, where I speak each semester with the combined sections of that class and conduct a mock town board public hearing to give the students the opportunity to experience and participate in local government. It was Friday, March 13th, as fitting a date as possible. And as I looked out at the 60 or so seniors in the auditorium-style classroom at Brighton High School, I couldn't help but think that I was sharing their last traditional day of high school with them. And as challenging as the rest of the school year was, I can't say enough about the administration, teachers, parents, and students who pivoted so quickly to remote education. And as I watched many of those same students drive by my home a few months later in the seniors' graduation car parade, I was proud of each one of them. And I hope that in some way they were stronger for the experience, even if it was an experience we would not wish on anyone. As I've often said, education, along with sustainability and diversity and inclusion, are Brighton's core values that have made our Brighton community extraordinary. For too long, New York State has failed to provide contractually mandated foundation aid to the Brighton Central School District. While other districts, including the Rochester City School District, were also impacted by these foundation aid shortfalls, no district in New York State has felt a larger percentage shortfall than the Brighton Central School District, a shortfall that has now reached over 50% this year. Brighton now has 2 new state representatives in Albany, Senator Jeremy Cooney and Assembly Member Sarah Clark. Both of them have recognized the seriousness of the funding shortfall, and they have already sponsored legislation that would ensure that at the very least, all school districts, including Brighton, would be assured of foundation aid funding at a rate of at least 70% of mandated levels. This is a good start, and I've written to both of these representatives expressing my support for their legislation and for funding education more fairly and more systematically in Brighton and across New York State. At the same time our schools were reinventing themselves, the town of Brighton was doing the same. Throughout the process, my primary goal was to protect the health and safety of our town staff, the people who wanted or needed to interact with the town and the community at large, while still providing essential town services. Relying on the guidance of public health officials, I declared a state of emergency in Brighton due to COVID and issued a series of emergency orders, temporarily modifying provisions of the town code to protect the public health here in Brighton and to facilitate the extraordinary measures that small businesses were taking to stay in business safely. We streamlined the process for installing tents at restaurants to allow expanded outdoor dining throughout the summer. We temporarily allowed recreational vehicles to park in driveways to allow family members to isolate safely at home. We worked with Temple Brith Kodesh in Monroe County to establish a drive-through COVID testing site that has served thousands of people throughout the area and continues to operate, helping public officials track the spread of COVID in our community. I'm grateful to Temple B'rith Kodesh Executive Director Mike Udelson and Rabbi Peter Stein for facilitating this important testing program. Throughout it all, town staff continue to work, continue to serve the community, and I want to acknowledge their continued leadership in adapting to COVID. I also want to thank them for their commitment to developing and adhering to safety plans that allowed town operations to continue with a very low rate of infection. As part of that acknowledgement, I want to thank my colleagues on the town board who are all with us tonight: Jason DePonzio, Chris Werner, Robin Wilt, and Christine Corrado, as well as Dan Amon, and all the residents who volunteer their time and talent to serve on our volunteer boards. This year more than ever, it's clear that municipal government cannot do everything alone. So I'm especially grateful for my colleagues in government and education that are with us tonight, and those others who could not be here. I particularly want to express my deep appreciation for the work of Monroe County Public Health Director, Dr. Mike Mendoza, who has been accessible at all hours of the day and a voice of wisdom and calm throughout the pandemic. Just last Sunday night at about 9 o'clock, it took Dr. Mendoza all of 5 minutes to return a text of mine with a question that I had regarding the intersection of quarantines and vaccination affecting one of our town employees. None of us could ask for more than that. Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. The men and women of the Highway Department picked up lawn and garden debris all summer, focused on leaf pickup during the fall, and continue to conduct ice and snow removal from our streets and sidewalks. Well, I hope you don't have to do that anymore, but we all know you probably will. Throughout, using one person per vehicle at all times. I'm very pleased that just yesterday, the state of New York finally authorized highway and sewer workers, as well as all public-facing municipal employees, to receive vaccines, although this is something we have been requesting for quite some time. Kudos to Highway and Sewer Superintendent and Commissioner of Public Works, Mike Guyon, who led our outstanding men and women throughout this year and took the lead in many of our COVID planning activities. One of the most important components of taking Town Hall remote came from our IT department. Jeremy Lutz saw to it that key staff could not only work remotely during the pandemic, but also continue to address the long-term IT needs, IT maintenance, cybersecurity, and all the vital components of the town's IT department to better serve, so that we could better serve the residents under any set of circumstances. Town Clerk Dan Amon wears many hats, and his role has never been more important than during this past year, as his office has done so much to serve the community remotely. Dan always has customer service at heart, and he went out of his way to find new ways to serve the public's safety during the pandemic. He also took on the important position, unpaid I might add, of deputy supervisor during the pandemic in order to ensure high quality continuity of government, no matter what eventuality occurred. Even though Town Hall was closed during the first months of the pandemic, either Town Finance Director Paula Parker or Deputy Finance Director Suzanne Zaso were often in the office, regularly in the office, ensuring that payroll was completed properly, and that the bills were being paid on time. Paula and Suzanne responded to an impending revenue shortfall as we prepared the 2021 budget, and they've continued to stay on top of the fiscal impacts of the pandemic. With their help, we've made the tough decisions that have preserved the strength of Brighton's finances. I want to thank Congressmember Joe Morelli and Senators Schumer and Gillibrand for their steadfast support of federal aid for all local municipalities in the new COVID relief legislation. That funding will make a significant difference to Brighton's fiscal stability and will enable us to maintain and enhance community services going forward. The Finance Department also works with our Personnel Director, Tricia Van Putty, who had to learn a new vocabulary of relief measures for personnel issues arising out of COVID. Those measures changed literally daily, and I commend Tricia for her ability to process and apply those changes and communicate those changes to our staff over the past year. Thank you, Tricia. 2020 forced us to re-examine the role of law enforcement and the philosophy used by our law enforcement agencies. During my time working for the town of Brighton, first as attorney and now as supervisor, I've worked with and watched 3 police chiefs, Chiefs Tom Vogel, Mark Henderson, and now Dave Cathaldi, each of whom wholeheartedly committed the department to community policing, based on a philosophy of serving as guardians, protecting the community rather than warriors. I can also say that each one has moved the bar higher as we continue to lean into the importance of the engagement of law enforcement with all members of the community. Tonight, Chief Cathaldi will present the proposed Brighton Police Reform Plan as mandated by Governor Cuomo in his Executive Order 203. The plan draws upon feedback from the community, generated from a survey conducted by the RIT Center for Public Safety Initiatives, and a community meeting held at Temple Brith Kodesh by the Monroe County Alliance for the Transformation of Community and Police, otherwise known as MCAT-CP, and also recommendations from community organizations, such as the United Christian Leadership Ministries, whose work has been incredibly valuable to me and to Chief Cathaldi, as well as President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. Each of these and additional supporting information are attached to the proposed plan. The RIT study, which includes over 850 responses, indicates that 90% of all respondents expressed satisfaction with the Brighton Police Department. In addition, 82% of the respondents who are members of what the study refers to as marginalized communities, people of color, people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ community, and others, also expressed satisfaction with the department. These are exceptional numbers, which show broad support throughout the Brighton community for the work of the Brighton Police Department. Still, we know we can do more and must do more. The plan recommendations include commitments to improve hiring practices to develop a more diverse department, community outreach and communication, with a particular emphasis on outreach to those the study identifies as marginalized communities, and enhanced training in de-escalation tactics and mental health. Each of these areas is currently being addressed by the Brighton Police Department, but there is more we can do, and as I said a moment ago, more we will do. I also want to acknowledge our other frontline first responders, both career and volunteer, from the Brighton Fire Department and Brighton Volunteer Ambulance. Brighton's 3 public safety agencies often work together as a team, and I thank you all for helping keep Brighton safe. I do want to note that there will be a remote community meeting on the proposed Brighton Police Reform Plan next Tuesday at 7 p.m. remotely, and we'll be posting information on that meeting tomorrow, but the community is invited. The pandemic has made it difficult for courts everywhere to operate, but I respect and appreciate the work that the judges and staff of the Brighton Town Court have put in to continue to operate as best as possible, subject not only to public health guidelines, but also rules and guidelines imposed by the New York State Office of Court Administration. Judges Falk and Morris, Court Administrator Lisa Pavlovich, and all of the court staff have done their level best to serve people, many of whom are not too happy to be in the court in the first place. The pandemic led people everywhere outdoors, and our parks have received unprecedented usage during the past year, despite restrictions on the use of lodges and other facilities, such as basketball courts. The pandemic also made people hungry for connections with other people, particularly our seniors who have been so vulnerable to COVID and isolated by the shutdowns. The Brighton Parks and Brighton Recreation Departments, led by Matt Beeman and Becky Cotter respectively, have responded to all of these issues. The Brighton Parks Department has kept up with park maintenance, despite the challenge that COVID has caused their own staff. The Recreation Department has held remote programming, and even some socially distanced in-person programming, all in compliance with public health guidelines. In particular, the Recreation Department has worked with seniors to ensure that they stay connected in order to help protect their mental and their physical health. I'm pleased to announce that during tonight's town board meeting, Matt, Becky, and I will be asking the board to approve a request for proposals for professional services to advise the town on preparing a survey to assess community recreational needs and evaluate future facility operation options for providing such services. I look forward to working with Matt and Becky, as well as Mike Guyon and the volunteer members of our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board as we chart this course forward. The Brighton Memorial Library normally serves thousands of people each year. This year, the library closed for several months, but following the example of so many small businesses, set up a curbside operation that provided a link to much of the physical material in the Brighton Memorial Library's collection, in addition to all the online services they already offer. The library is now reopened, but curbside service is still available, and I thank Executive Director Jennifer Reese-Taggart for navigating these difficult times. Our town assessor, Sue Wentworth, deals directly with our residents, particularly, again, our senior residents, and she's continued to do so throughout the past year. Sue has met with residents in the parking lot where she's had to handle their paperwork and questions, and she stayed current on all of the current changing rules determined by the state during the pandemic. For the most part, her customers are no longer walking in the door, but the assessor's office continues to help residents as if they were standing right there in front of her. Thank you, Sue. The job of town attorney has never been more important, and following a reorganization of our legal services last year, Ken Gordon is now responsible for planning and zoning work, as well as code enforcement on behalf of the town, in addition to his previous responsibilities. Ken now can provide a holistic analysis of our legal issues and continues to do so from the perspective not only of a seasoned lawyer, but also someone who has held local office right here in Brighton. In keeping with Brighton's tradition of being first to implement important sustainability and environmental policies, I'm very pleased that we are now the first and only community in Monroe County to have implemented community choice aggregation. CCA is a New York State Public Service Commission regulated plan that allows us to replace the incumbent utility electricity supplier, in our case, RG&E, with a new supplier, Source Power, selected through competitive bidding, who will supply renewable energy to residents and small businesses in Brighton. Based on numbers I received just today, 10,506 residential and small business accounts in Brighton, approximately 85% of our eligible customers, now use 100% renewable source energy generated in New York State through hydropower facilities as members of our community choice aggregation program. Contrary to traditional thinking that you have to pay more for clean energy, the cost of this renewable energy per kilowatt hour is very slightly less than the average price per kilowatt hour over the last 2 years for traditional non-renewable RG&E electric supply. And the price of electricity under our CCA is fixed for 2 years. Those of us who watched the chaotic price increases in Texas after the recent cold spell there can understand the benefits of a fixed price for electricity. I know that some residents still have questions, and I'm pleased that the feedback on the CCA customer service phone line has been very positive. In particular, I know there have been some budget billing accounts that were not properly transferred over by RG&E. But I can tell you that the Rocktricity customer service team has been working through those accounts one by one. If you're one of those people with a budget billing problem, or if you have any questions about your utility bill, or if you weren't switched over to CCA, but you would now like to take advantage of low prices for renewable energy, please call Rocktricity at 244-0244. That's 244-0244 for CCA customer service. As I've already noted, 2020 will be remembered not just for the pandemic, but for the need for all of us in government and all of us as individuals to address issues of social justice that have too long been ignored. The Town of Brighton Idea Board, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Advisory Board is hard at work developing a diversity and inclusion plan for the Town of Brighton. And in fact, tomorrow evening, I'll be joining the Idea Board for a Zoom call with officials from Beaverton, Oregon, a city that is similar in size to Brighton that has developed a diversity plan. In particular, we're interested in learning how Beaverton has implemented their plan because it's been in effect now for a couple of years. We don't have models like Beaverton closer to home because when it comes to this important work, Brighton is first again. When completed, Brighton will be the first and only town in upstate New York with a diversity and inclusion plan. Tonight, I'm also committing that the Town of Brighton will engage in racial justice training for all of our employees, very possibly in concert with other area communities that are prioritizing this training. And I also want to commend the residents of Meadowbrook and Cord confronting our racist deeds for your work in taking legal action to rescind the racist covenants in the chain of title to each of your homes and replacing that language with anti-racist language. I encourage other residents of Brighton to follow this example, whether individually or in your neighborhoods, in order to rescind racial or ethnic covenants to your properties. Economic justice is also a very real issue, highlighted by the ongoing debate at the federal level about raising the federal minimum wage from $7.25 per hour, a rate that hasn't changed since 2009, despite 12 years of inflation. The state of New York has a higher minimum wage. And when I became supervisor, the Town of Brighton committed to pay all full-time employees at least a living wage. But in light of the apparent failure of a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour to pass in Congress, once again, it is time for Brighton to be first and to do more. Therefore, I'm committing to all of our Brighton employees, full and part-time and seasonal, that in line with the proposal for a gradual increase in the federal minimum wage that was before Congress, we here in Brighton will increase the minimum wage for all Brighton employees to $15 per hour by 2025. That increase will have a modest impact on our budget, but more importantly, it will have a very real and positive impact on the people who serve our residents. As I did last year, I also want to update the community on the progress towards redeveloping the parcel at the interchange of 590 and Monroe Avenue for commercial use, the Whole Foods Plaza. For those who do not follow this project closely, in 2018, the town board approved a proposal first submitted in 2015 for a 50,000 square foot Whole Foods grocery store, the first in the Rochester area, along with other retail space and a Starbucks. The total project size would be about 80,000 square feet, all to be constructed on land that is zoned for commercial development. And just for comparison's sake, that 50,000 square foot Whole Foods store compares to a Wegmans store down the street of over 130,000 square feet. 5 public hearings were held on the Whole Foods Plaza, and the town conditioned its approval on the developer installing various traffic safety mitigation measures on Monroe Avenue at their sole expense, and acquiring rights of way and constructing the Auburn Trail running from Highland Avenue to the Pittsford Town line between Clover Street and I-590, connecting with the existing Auburn Trail in Pittsford, again, at the developer's sole expense. When acquired and constructed, the Auburn Trail will allow safe walking and biking to the Harley School and to businesses and neighborhoods, again, at no expense to taxpayers for that construction. The developer will also grant a conservation easement to the town to serve as a buffer to Clover Street. And let me be absolutely clear on this. The project will pay full taxes, estimated at approximately $400,000 per year upon completion. Those taxes will include about $200,000 in taxes per year for the Brighton Central School District, which, as we just discussed, is seriously underfunded by the state and needs additional sources of revenue to continue its tradition of academic excellence. Construction on the Starbucks is well underway, and construction on the Auburn Trail and the traffic safety mitigation improvements are also expected to begin soon. This project will eliminate the vacant eyesore that currently greets visitors to our community and will help promote economic development along Monroe Avenue without causing any significant traffic impact. In the years to come, Brighton will have new shopping options and new tax base to support our continued strength as a community, traffic safety improvements, and a new trail. All thanks to the approval and construction and development of the Whole Foods Plaza. And to that point, to the point of our fiscal position, the town of Brighton was fiscally impacted by the pandemic. The significant drop in sales tax revenues, hundreds of thousands of dollars, was the primary factor, but we also experienced reductions in parks and recreation program revenues and in facilities and field rentals, among others. We did receive a share of CARES Act funding from the county that mitigated certain impacts, and we are anticipating support from the new federal COVID relief package, which will for the first time include direct funding to municipalities like Brighton, although it will come with significant restrictions on how those funds can be used. Brighton's fiscal condition overall continues to be strong. Our Moody's AA2 bond rating remains unchanged, and the New York State Comptroller has again determined that Brighton has among the lowest levels of fiscal stress in the state. We will remain strong as the pandemic recedes, and we will continue to use all suitable means to fund the programs and the services that people move to Brighton to enjoy. Each of you has contributed to making Brighton strong in many ways. whether it's your commitment to following public health guidelines during a pandemic, volunteering on a community board or organization, or assuming the role of educator to your children or your grandchildren in hybrid classes, you have helped build a better Brighton this very difficult year, 2020. You have helped make Brighton first in our community in so many ways, a model that other communities aspire towards. It is a privilege and it's an honor to serve as your town supervisor. I thank each of you for being here tonight remotely and for the things you do, the many things that you do, large and small, to make us all proud to call Brighton our hometown. Thank you.